Okay, thank you very much for being back. We had to make a couple of changes in the program schedule, of course. To introduce the next speaker, of course, we know that someone has been very valiantly helping Italian speakers with translations. The thing is that that was not scheduled because she made the big mistake of volunteering to assist with the translation today. And then, of course, what happened was that she was friendly asked to help with translation every time, for which we'd like to thank you very much. She is now going to give a presentation about the Polytopia project. It's a very interesting presentation because I'd like to know better than I do what Polytopia is. It's a philosophical experiment living on the net since 2008. And it explores the necessity to create a concept that can facilitate and accommodate plurality and diversity. Definitely going to be a good presentation. For those who are watching in teleplays, it has the text on the new graphs is a little bit difficult to read, but we'll be uploading it also to teleplays for you to see. So I'd like to give the floor to Julia for the Polytopia presentation.
Okay, good afternoon. This is the opening of the afternoon, and this time I'm going to translate myself, which is as well quite work, because after all we are all interfaces. We either manage to make the content accessible or not. So I will give a very, very short presentation of a project which is called Polytopia, that lives on the web for the last 2 years. It is hosted in the website of Space Collective, which can be found easily. It's www.spacecollective.com. And it is was created by a director and very special graphic designer, Koene and Volker. But I think what is most relevant here is the kind of philosophical experiment that Polytopia represents, and the way it was born and what for, under which kind of intent. First of all, the word Polytopia comes from poly, which means many, and topos, which in Greek means place or state, as in state of affair or state of mind. And it stands for the kind of plurality and diversity that we are moving towards in a very fast way, speedy way. If we look at all the very interesting talk we had in these last few days, it's quite a characteristic of our future. There was a metaphor that was used in the presentation of Max Moore concerning the fact that the future is not a Star Trek life. And I think it's a very important one, and it's a very important one also from the emotional standpoint, because when we look at science fiction movies, what we find there is that, yes, the human is always the same, and also the emotional fabric stays exactly the same. So the motivations are the same, and the communication patterns are the same. And knowing that we are going towards more and more plurality makes sense to begin to consider the necessity of creating a conceptual backbone that might help us accommodate the plurality and the diversity that characterize our future, our close future. not that fast, and it is something that is not very well performed at the moment. So I will begin with the very, it's meant to be very fast, and I'm going to introduce some of the key concepts. Polytopia is existing as a group of thinkers and artists and writers on the net that are basically engaging with what I've been describing here. So the possibility of a conceptual backbone for the future. And it comes as, in this sense, as a ground for engagement with the future. And so I'm going here just to present some of the main concepts and the way we correlated them in the map that are coming up in all the polylogs that are ongoing within this philosophical experiment in the last 2 years. So here we can see it's Polytopia. We began by calling it our habitat in the infoverse because we are more and more immersed within this networked reality and this data reality. And in a way, we need a mind habitat. It cannot be considered a home in the physical aspect of it, but we need a habitat where to exist within the infocology that hosts us. And there is opportunity with it because it's open for design, it's open for input, it's open for engagement in this case. So the first key concept that I would mention is a ground for engagement, which means that Polytopia proposes itself as a ground for engagement with the future, a ground for engagement with the other. And in this sense, it is a facilitator of a transcultural meeting of minds. And no, and as I said before, it's also an attitude toward future. And this is, you can see what is written here is future as a plurality of open-ended narratives, which one of the main difficulties that we have at the moment is how to interface this kind of possible reality. We do not know how to communicate with it, or we do not know how to have it happen. So in a way, part of this philosophical experiment is also the creation of a relevant interface. It doesn't matter if it is conceptual, if it is in the immediacy of tools and media, but it's a very big part of the dealing with it. So from the plurality of open-ended narrative, we have the manifesting of multiple inclinations, and what I said before concerning interface and aesthetic interface. This I will back to what I said initially concerning the metaphor about emotions and fabric of emotions, because without managing to engage the emotional aspect of whoever comes to respect the future or the plurality of ideas that are there, basically not necessarily the possibility to interact with it and to translate it into a live dialogue or a live debate or an open door that is participating and not resisting in this sense. Whenever you have an interface which is functional, is a aesthetic in this sense. It stands also, there is another pointer with aesthetic which is called the aesthetic singularity, in the sense that whenever we think of why to engage with the future and where to direct it towards, the first answer is one that comes from emotions, from art, from aesthetics, from beauty. Or at least this is the way we wish to describe it or to see it or to project it. So when this is increasing in its iteration, we manage to eliminate barriers in between mediums and in between dimensions. This is something that we behold very clearly in the whole event of the web. We see that already barriers that have to do with the distance in space and distance in time, and barriers that have to do with the specific parameters of identity, like gender, like nationality, like origin, are very much diffused, opening quite a freedom in this sense to a different kind of interaction that was never possible before. And it has very interesting implications that we are also exploring, but also discussing, entering the effort of the description of it. So one of the key points, as I said before, diversity. Diversity which is intended as diversity within an ecosystem. The different forms of life of an ecosystem can describe its diversity. One of the important aspects here is that when we refer to sentient entities and we project it to a future, we are not speaking about necessarily human entities. Another very important aspect of it is that if we wish to accommodate this diversity without too much suffering, we will have to bypass the biological interfaces that mostly belong to previous evolutionary era, mostly belong to what we call the Neolithic mind. And in a way, we already behold that with the few tools that we have, being the technology or the level of interconnectivity, the possibilities for communication are branching and bifurcating, and they bring quite a set of variety of possibilities that we are not usually experiencing face-to-face, though the face-to-face might bring eventually a very critical aspect of it, but I think there is something that opens in terms of future, what does it mean to interact and to cooperate and to engage without the first set of parameters and barriers. The second one is accessibility. Now this is a very important one. This is also why we made a part of this presentation, because no matter which is the cluster of ideas, if it is transhumanism, as we heard all these days, if it is ideas about opportunity and possibilities about the future, we have the issue of making them accessible. And what does it mean to make them accessible? And one of the things that belongs to this age is that the ways and modes of creating accessibility are in explosion. We never had so many. So the creation of interfaces becomes a very critical parameter, no matter in which kind of context. It's not only from the standpoint of the digital context. So as I said before, it involves time and space, for example, through communication, which by now it's telepresence, and a distributed value system, because if we wish for sentient interaction, we cannot ground the gravity around a closed or a fixed value system, it will never manage to include or to accommodate neither the diversity nor the possibility nor what we heard before, the diversion from the anthropocentric view. Another thing that, another parameter which is very critical is how to create a kind of event. It doesn't matter if it is a social event, a conceptual event, a mini event, that has more than one entry and exit point. For those of you who are familiar with the concept of raison, this is basically what it's about. It's the ability to create a network of some kind that does not have a tree-like structure, but has multiple entry points and multiple exit points, because we see it very clearly, for example, within Polytopia and the kind of polylog that is going on there, that each one has his cue, each one has where, which kind of interest, which kind of motivation, which kind of time it will be relevant to enter, to take part, and to exit. So this is just an example of this, but it's about creating a change, significant change in the architecture. The architecture to which we are used, it's mostly tree-like. It doesn't matter if it is an organization, if it is knowledge, if it is the way we describe the world. We always find some kind of hierarchical way to open structures. And this is a kind of architecture that tries to bypass that, because it's an architecture that adapts much better to a diversified kind of face space. Next. Openness. There is the concept of open as it is known from the web, but there is also the concept of open in terms of how much possibility there is for engagement with something and how much freedom to take whatever is available, made accessible, and to develop it in a particular kind of direction. Now, I heard this as an undertone in many of the talks of transhumanist direction, speaking about the possibility of basically developing one's body, one's life, one's opportunity in the direction that looks most intimate to the individual. So in this sense, it's an openness to bifurcation, because the moment something is being really made accessible and open, it begins to bifurcate. It is an opening in knowledge and perspective, because there must be a flow in order for it to be alive and iterative. And it's an emergent, basically where it leads to, it's to an emergent collaborative marketplace. It doesn't matter if it's of ideas, technologies, of cross-fertilization, which brings us to, yes. Multiplicity here stands basically for the possibility that becomes very tangible in our future to run multiple flows, to run multiple identities, to run multidimensionality. So the fact that we are in contact within the same time, even if we are not close space-wise, it is something that, for example, grows with the increase of connectivity. It doesn't matter how it grew along all the history of our civilization, we are coming to quite a threshold within it. Individual, collective, continuum. We came till here with a kind of opposition in between the concept of individual and collective. So if you wish to be an individual, you need to release the collective, or you need to put it at a different kind of value. If you wish to be in the collective, or to be part, or to use it, whatever, you need to release part of your individual freedom. And this creates a very clear dichotomy, opposition, and basically what we are beholding is that more and more this is not the case, this is not the correct way to describe it, because in between individuals and collective, it's becoming more and more a spectrum, and we see it a lot on the kind of phenomena that are again on the web, but not only, and it's a matter of interfaces basically. That the level of individuality or of collectiveness is almost a variable upon a continuum. I can decide in an instance how much my individuality takes over, or how much of my connectivity in the collective takes over. And in each instance, the kind of intelligence, for example, that this will yield will be different. It will have to be measured or accurate to the particular situation. So there are moments in which a group kind of interaction will yield the most intelligent version, and there are moments in which the individuality of some kind of path and proceeding along it will be the best card to play. I will not enter the whole field, but basically this is what it is, an option that opens and that we are basically looking up to, what I call combined interactive intelligence, which is basically how to create the kind of ambient environment and state, multiple states, in which this is facilitated. Why? Because it brings an extra in value, and it brings an extra in resource, and it brings an extra in interest. We do need cross-fertilization. We do need many, many things in the correlation of communication with each other. We are going, and we heard it many times already, we are going in an almost impossible future ahead, whether for the good or for the bad, and if we will not be able to enter it, think it, project it, and actuate it together, or simply survive it together, I don't think we really have the resources to do it.
Yeah, that's the last.
Okay. Okay. So the last one basically brings to this fluid affinity replaces nucleic identity. I will be very, very short about it, which means that as long as we are based upon a kind of identification that has specific parameters, it doesn't matter if they are the outcome of the place where we live or the way we are raised or many other kinds of narratives, we are doomed to war, because my identity negates any different kind of identity, as good as we can be in pretending it doesn't. Fluid affinity stands for the possibility that through all what I described above, and a radical kind of interface and an enough degree of plurality, we might be able to interact through fluid affinity. Means the moment there is an affinity between me and you, we are going to interact. This does not define us, and it does not identify. It gives us the motivation and the possibility to interact and to do something out of it. So that's basically it, and I wish to yes, to thank Julia for this presentation.
I think this was a very interesting talk, and I'm sure there are questions. We're going to take 1 or 2 questions and we will ask the first one. Now, this looks like a very interesting project, and switch to webcam mode because I want to give to someone who is much more interested than I to is understand that everyone knows that you're using the PDF or the PPT. Right, so you choose which one to use. I'm giving the floor to understand the second talk of the other.
Thank you. And of course, there is this law of nature that whenever someone starts talking, people start to arrive. So if I just do a bit meaningless talk now, the internet connection might organize itself nicely. Let's see what happens. Well, usual. It's very enjoyable to be here on TransVision. I actually managed to be so far all TransVisions except for the one in Caracas. It kind of annoys me that I missed that one. I cannot go back in time and fix that. But generally, I've been talking about a lot of very different subjects on TransVision. A ridiculous amount about cognitive enhancement. After a while, that it worked. So I started to do for other sites. So now I'm going to do big picture stuff. We at the Future Institute, we try to kind of take pride in trying to think about the big issues. And now I'm trying. That doesn't mean I'm interested in the more concrete areas. I actually think it's very important to tie what we're doing and thinking about into the real life, into the everyday politics, what to actually tell politicians and convince the civil servants about. How this would tie in, I don't know. We have to think about it. We have to be very creative and open for important work. So basically, my question is, what can we say about the possibilities for really advanced civilizations in the universe? And it turns out that there are a few ways we can actually analyze this. And this is interesting because we're also learning about the universe. We're starting to see some aspects which are somewhat disconcerting if you're a humans like that. Because the universe seems to have some bad sides that we will have to deal with. And similarly, the law of physics also have some aspects which limit what we can do with really advanced civilizations. So my is going to be kind of sketching out some estimates of what could we achieve given what we currently know about physics, and even what we can extrapolate given that. And finally, hopefully, what we can actually say about what we should be doing in the present. Because perhaps surprisingly, from these rather cosmic speculations, there are a few concrete things we can actually start thinking about. Well, I always wanted to start a paper this sentence, consider a spherical supercivilization. And the paper version of this will definitely contain it. And in general, what do we say about this ultimate fate? In theology, there is this called eschatology, the teachings about the final things, the end of the world, where the soul is going, all the really big and dramatic stuff. Freeman Dyson, however, the great physicist, he started a bit physical eschatology in 1979 with his brilliant paper about whether life can survive indefinitely in the universe. And since then, this little domain has thrived and grown. It's not an enormous area. It's much more speculative and strange than even the surface of terrestrial intelligence. But there are a few results. I've been working together with Nina Sikovic from Belgrade, who's also associated with us. So some of these results are due to discussion of the whole literature of physical eschatology. And another interesting thing about this is that, well, our understanding of physics is changing, and we know that we don't know everything about physics. There are some anomalies we know exist, and we know that quantum mechanics and gravity, they don't really work well together. So obviously there is a few things. However, there is an interesting convergence. When we get new physical theories, it's not as if we discover, oh, the law of gravity exists. Rather, we figure out a new, updated version of the law of gravity. And refinement is quite good. So in areas where we have experience, I think we can actually trust our physics pretty well. There are going to be unknown physics and engineering, so that's going to, of course, throw in spanners in the work. So one can this exercise is kind of minimal account of, well, given physics we know or think we know, can be done. And then, of course, we can use that as a first approximation. We can also try to set this up as a hermetic exercise. Well, we can have a lot of options for what possible future physics might allow to refine our arguments a bit more. But let's just keep to the basic stuff. Also, what can we say about civilization? This is a great quote, perhaps a bit too much text, from Kardashev, the great SETI expert, where he points out a very simple and very important. Civilizations are physical objects. Whether the civilization is an image prime or a great space empire, they're actually physical objects, they're run by physical laws, and they are also limited by those. Why a civilization does this, that depends, of course, on its internal values. The culture, the needs, the ideas its inhabitants have, what should be done. But there doesn't seem to be any, although that seems to be pretty unbound, although there might be laws of context or maybe even theology that apply universally, we can see quite a lot of physical properties. Kardashev noted that civilization actually seems to be, there is no particular reason why they would have to be a particular size. There are communication limits. So if one part of a civilization can communicate with another one, it's going to kind of split into two. But it's not really an obvious scale effect we got otherwise. Similarly, we might think about, well, what do actually a civilization want? And well, I sit in a philosophy department and we have a long list of possible ultimate goals or ultimate goods we might want to go for. Maybe we should become as happy as possible. And then, of course, the right kind of happiness, because there are a lot of different kinds of happiness. Maybe knowledge, or maybe just surviving as long as possible. Well, whatever that is. And a lot of people, well, maybe the goal of is actually to have as much gold as possible. We cannot completely rule it out, although it would seem to be a very, very odd thing if the universe were organized like that. Or it might be that we actually should behave ourselves. It might be that we all should be good Kantians who act badly if we don't. Or it could be that life itself is good, or freedom, or indeed love. However, we can't say really what we or an alien civilization might figure out about it. It might turn out that no civilization will ever figure out what the ultimate goal is. We can figure out instrumental goals, goals that are actually good for achieving those goals. If we have more intelligence, if we have more technological capability, if we have more resources, better security, and better ability to coordinate, we can actually achieve those goals easily. So that seems to be something that no matter what kind of civilization you have, you will tend to benefit from. You can, of course, imagine kind of pathological civilizations that just want to exist exactly 1,000 years in a nice black hole behind. That's certainly a possible view. There is much stranger views among humans. But it seems rather unlikely that such a civilization lasts. So in the long run, it seems that computational power, physical access, and communication are going to be something that surviving big civilizations are going to be interested in, even though these ones are just stepping stones to something much more important in life. Another interesting thing is, whatever the ultimate goals are, that might also determine what we see to do on the larger scales. So, for example, if pure pleasure is the most important goal, it might not matter that we can't communicate with each other. If we have little stations with extremely happy brains, it doesn't matter if stations never encounter each other, because these happy brains are just producing a lot of happiness. That's strange, because most of our positive happiness is, of course, more of social nature. So we might imagine, on the other hand, that it's something cultural that's really important in life. Or it might be that we want to maximize the total amount of intelligence. And that seems to require, in a bigger area, systems that are connected. Thoughts must be able to cross from one side to the other. Cultural traits must be able to. So this goes to some extent actually do determine where the civilization might want to be going. Okay? And we'll get some extra information here.
No, I'd like to ask you to take a 30-second break and to quick presentation for me on the USB-D, because the people on the internet would like to see presentations on.
Oh, that would be lovely. So where does the stick
Is there?
the untitled?
Yeah, your presentation is here. Better not to do.
Yeah, well, you get to both. It for press of one. All right.
Okay, this is a special message from me to Sergio Carrero. As you see, your wish is our command. We have interrupted others for 30 seconds in order to copy PPT on the stick. Now I'm going on the other computer.
How do I disconnect this?
Just go.
Okay, yeah, great.
Okay, just.
Yeah, no problem. That's right. Yep. Well, sorry. Let's see what we can get. So, we get a brief video of that again. Yep. So, well, what about the universe? Now we're thinking about what civilizations might want. What about the universe? And I have some bad news. The universe seems to be a rather unsustainable thing. From an environmentalist point of view, the universe seems to be very, very bad. Normally, when we're talking about environmental things, it's of course the activities of human and human civilizations which are the problem. But what do you do when nature itself seems to be bent on making things work? Right now, we're living in what's called the first era. If we look outside our galaxy, we see, first of all, we see the galaxy, we see there are so many stars. 100 billion stars just in the Milky Way dominating the sky. But if you look beyond that, you get interest in large-scale structures. We see that have enormous clouds of galaxies forming beautiful, intricate structure. This is a fairly old map, but you see these voids and screens of clusters of galaxies. It's quite beautiful. Unfortunately, it won't last. And most of us, of course, know that stars can burn out. The good news is that small mass stars are actually quite precious. In a trillion years, we're still going to be red dwarf stars, right? It's not kind of going to be the color scale of the universe, but we're still going to be around. But still, it is annoying the stars are running out. Certainly stars are exploding and creating shock waves in the gas clouds and other star formation and so on, but eventually it's going to slow down. It's going to not slow down tomorrow, but in about 1 trillion years. We also got a lot of dark matter. This is the bullet cluster where it's kind of evidence. They have used some good coloring here for the moment, but there is a lot of dark matter around. Dark matter in itself is not that bad. There is a lot of it too. We're just about 100 of the real units. Unfortunately, dark matter doesn't so far seem to have much of structure. It doesn't look like it can build very much interesting stuff out. It doesn't look like right now that it can be used for mind. And that's a bit. We can probably do something other useful with it. So if we look at the kind of history, and this of course is immediate from the font of all knowledge, Wikipedia. So this is a diagram of the history of the universe using a double logarithmic scale. We're down there in the stelliferous era. The young period, a transient at the start of the universe, where there are stars. And most galaxies haven't collided with each other to turn into big elliptical galaxies. And of course, it's going to be white dwarf stars and neutron stars hang around, and then eventually those are going to go down, so the white dwarfs are going to become perfect diamond crystals, quite beautiful, except that they're not going to be dark around them, except that in the really long run, of course, protons, according to most of supersymmetry, seem to have to be unstable. So we have never ever observed a proton decay, but it seems to be very strong theoretical reason to believe protons are not stable, which means that eventually matter is going to evaporate. It's going to take a ridiculous amount of time by our standards, but it's going to happen. And then the only thing that's going to be left is going to be a bunch of hotspots, electrons, and black holes. And the black holes, again, like we haven't observed it, but seems pretty likely, they are going to evaporate due to Hawking radiation. It's going to take about a Google years. Eventually, all the black holes are going to evaporate, and then we're just left with a few lonely electrons floating around in nothing, and nothing in particular happening. Which is not exactly true, actually, which I'm going, if I get into that. Then, of course, there's another problem with the universe. This is a feature depending on how you see it. It has a cosmological horizon that means that it's accelerating. It's not just expanding. It's expanding faster and faster. This means that if you want to go to a remote galaxy, it seems to be receding. And while you're on your way towards that, it seems to be speeding up relative to spaceship. Which means that beyond a certain distance, about 50 billion light years, you will not be able to catch it up even a light speed spaceship. This is pretty annoying. That means that we cannot get beyond that. We can see some of those galaxies. We know we will never, ever get there. And it's about 1/3 the edge of this universe. So we can actually observe quite a lot of things we cannot touch. It also has another effect. What's going to happen is, of course, galaxies are going to move apart. Galaxies that are orbiting each other in a cluster, we're going to continue orbiting. But the clusters are going to tend to drift apart. If you have a supercluster, a lot of little clusters orbiting each other, it can hold together. But the superclusters, that beautiful lazy structure, is kind of going to be fragmenting. And you get these little island universes separated by accelerating distances. So eventually you're just going to see your own supercluster. Personally, I find that's sad, but it's not really dangerous. The real danger is that it's also making the universe dangerously hot. To the minus 29 Kelvin. Due to various rather weird aspects, this is of course partially measured, so this needs to have quantum gravity to take that into account. So you need to believe water radiation and so on. It seems that you get rise of radiation. That means that the temperature never goes down to zero. And that's bad news for you who have to lie to devices model, because as we're going to see, you need really cold temperatures to do a of the process, and if it never gets down to zero, that means we have a limit on how much processing we can do. So all in all, we have a problem that we are right down here, and real soon, if we spread out rapidly, we can actually reach the horizon. But not long after that, we're actually going to have this fragmentation of everything into this disconnected component. And if we wait long enough, well, molecular structures get gone, and then of course there is no structure at all, because assuming you can get something out of black holes, they're going to be gone. And then in the far future, you might even get Boltzmann birds, which tend to infest old universes. I don't think I'm going to have time to get into them, but they're more a problem for philosophy department than the physics department. But in any way, let's see, what can we do about growth? How much can civilization grow? And there are various things that limit what we can do. The amount of resources we got, the light speed limit, and the thermodynamics of computation. Thermodynamics is an interesting area, because I might imagine some future we find a way of traveling faster than light. I would be slightly surprised, but I wouldn't really be outraged and say, no, that must just be wrong. However, I would probably say that somebody found a way around second law of thermodynamics, because that seems to be really fundamental and really tied to the way things are, because restated it means we tend to get to more probable states, with a higher probability than less probable ones, which almost seems to be a tautology, and that's hard to get around. And finally, we have a problem of waste. So the amount of resources we can get, this is nice view. We can get quite a lot of kilograms of stuff here. And if you count dark matter, it might be useful for something, you will get even more. And even in a supercluster, you can get a lot. I also done some calculation. You actually start moving galaxies together to make a higher cluster. You get about a number of magnitudes, but I think the hassle is going to be pretty horrendous. You literally need to use galaxy masses and turn them into energy to move enormous amounts of clouds of matter. I don't want to be air traffic controller. The nice thing about matter is we know we can build this stuff out. It's very convenient. And we can actually make memory storage, process. Dark matter, it might be possible to extract energy from it, especially by dumping into black holes and then extracting energy from black holes. Black holes also seem to have a nice property that you can use to cool things. And maybe according to how they might be used for processing. That's very wild handling for the moment, so we shouldn't trust that. We can't really expand faster than light seems. In reality, of course, our spaceships are limited by the horrible Jacopo rocket equation that forces us to use a ridiculous amount of energy to get anywhere. The good news is, however, that even that graceful diagram I showed previously gives us plenty of time. Even if we allows 1% of light speed, it's pretty doable to get out to the far reaches. Especially if you use Emperor decay probes, which seems to be a pretty light technology in the not too far future. It's also interesting to know that it's actually better to packets of matter rather than laser beams or ray tracing, and more efficient energy-wise. So maybe the postal service does have a future. I tried to keep the equations away, but here's my favorite one, the Brillouin inequality. That actually shows that there is a certain cost of energy you always have to pay in order to erase certain information. We can also try to trick things by using so-called reverse computing. We then need to translate things into bigger, long-lasting, and larger computations. But that doesn't really change my argument very much. We need to pay a certain cost of this entropy to format the work, to actually build whatever it is our civilization is based on. So basically what that's of course not what it is. It's going to be doing other things. But the computational subset, that's of course going to be underlying. For example, you might argue that happiness might not be a computational process, but it seems like you would need a computational process in order to have happiness. You might want, for example, distinguish moment from moment, and that requires memory. And you probably want to have a quality to the happiness, so that also seems to contain information. The real cost here seems to be also that we need error correction. Bits are occasionally going to go wrong, and then we need to fix it. And that has a cost that we cannot get away from. We need to get rid of this wastage from all these error fixing. And again, we can use the background radiation, or we can use big black holes. I really think I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to get into this, but there's a lot of weird engineering you can start thinking about here. So, putting it all together and kind of leaving out a lot of details, that's kind of the scenario I ended up with together with Milan is we have kind of three edges of the universe. We out that all started that kind of once upon a time, and that was all human and post-human history, and probably most of our expansion galaxy. And then you get to the age of expansion. It will be spreading out across the universe. And that can be done probably with self-replicating probes. And it seems that it's not too hard given even current understanding species to get there. The interesting thing is once you put your little flag on something, it seems that if you have a self-replicating technology, pretty easy to hold it. This is due to a particular theory about the Lanchester equation I don't have to get into, but basically it seems that first come, first serve. It's mine. So that means that there are several things. It's pretty unlikely that they could grab stuff from each other without extremely wasteful conflicts. So grabbing something means that you can probably keep it. And it seems to be rational actually to wait. Rather than immediately taking that juicy galaxy and turning all that energy inside into computations or happiness, it makes sense to wait. Because if the universe is twice as cold, you can do twice as many computations. And if nobody can actually take your galaxy from you in a practical sense, then it's actually really useful to wait a long while and that galaxy just gets more and more valuable up until eventually the universe stops getting colder. And it turns out that you don't really need to turn all the galaxy guardian robots or things like that for being waiting. There is a cool thing about that you need just a few copies actually, or backup copies, to have a good chance of indefinite survival. The problem might be that your neighbors might actually start chewing up their galaxy and heating up the local universe. So then you get really annoyed. Either you also start heating up stuff, or you have to wait really much longer before things cool down of their little it actually turns out that, and this really surprised me, there doesn't seem to be a good reason to turn off the stars. Previously, I was kind of being fastidious. Okay, let's turn off the stars and wait to use that. But it turns out that all that fusion, all these supernovas, they're about 1% of the total amount of mass. And you can get much more back through burning than black hole. It seems to be relatively rational, unless it's really easy to turn off stars, to actually just leave them there. They look good. But maybe if you're feeling you want to turn off stars anyway, just in case. And finally, as a very short period, we end up with actually exploiting this energy. And it turns out that the slower you are in exploiting this, the better it is. The more computation you get out of it, because if you use up all your energy immediately, you need it, and then it becomes costly to fix. So ideally, you should erase one bit there, then you wait a few millennia or trillions of years or whatever, and then you erase another bit. And you do very, very slowly. However, you can't do it too slowly because, of course, matter and structure tend to decay. So there's a kind of upper time limit. So in my calculations, I found that, well, if you actually wait until this very late era rather than just doing it, you get at least the first orders of magnitude more computation, which is useful for whatever is important than if you just do it right. And you can also, but you also have this time, so you might need to still do it a bit faster. There are interesting possibilities about maybe the universes are way out, etc. I don't have time to get into them, but right now things look dark, but we're going to have plenty of time to figure out ways of getting out of that. There is also an interesting idea that, well, maybe after the last competition have been done, all the universes used up, whatever has to be done, we should actually literally try to turn off the universe. There's something called the big rip that literally rips off the universe, and that's good to keep the Boltzmann rates. So, what does this lead in terms of policy and keeping the timetable there? Well, first of all, we have well, it's important with keeping the timetable. After all, every moment we wait, we lose in galaxies, and these galaxies could be home to so many happy beings, so much knowledge, so much interesting stuff. So I kind of updated this calculation, but basically, waiting in colonizing space loses an amazing number of possible human lives, or post-human lives. Similarly, as Nick has pointed out, any increase in the risk of us going extinct before getting to this glorious future also corresponds to a ridiculous amount of possible loss. And that suggests that we should actually take not just space colonization much more seriously and really go for it, but also existential threat are much worse than most people think. The problem is when we discount that, we tend to ignore it. Finally, I think this is an important thing, we also have a wonderful chance by being stuck here together on the planet. We actually have to speak, we can speak future. Once we start spreading out, we're going to lose actually causal contact. And that's going to be needed for really late eras. So we need to figure out now before we actually, let's say, leave the solar system. So we still probably got plenty of time, but it's actually quite important to use of our limitations right now, because our limitations right now allow us to come up with a rational choice that are going to make the future as good as possible. Well, that was that. Thank you.
Just in case everyone has answered email, we have one question.
Hugo. Yep. Well, first, I still have started ideas in that presentation.
Yeah.
What about multiverse? Is there any way to plan for a way to access that kind of shadow photons from various?
So far, I have not seen any useful way of making use of multiverse, except of course computing and stuff like that. So most likely multiverses are not going to be helpful. There is something you can do some forms of a case. You can do a kind of trade with multiverses by using simulations. I think maybe this is mostly a philosophical happy thought experiments rather than a practical startup idea. But the idea is that you can threaten other universes by threatening them. If you don't do as I say, I will million simulations of your universe and my universe, and then it's going to be a very nasty simulation. But the problem is you can't communicate that. So this mainly works if you're a philosopher. It doesn't work really as a business idea.
Okay, we're going to have one other short question while I change the view. One more and then to ask.
Yeah.
Can you say something more about computation?
About
Reversible computation?
yes. So the problem with normal computation is that it tends to be irreversible. The inputs to a little logic gate, you cannot figure them out from the output. That means that there is a thermodynamic loss. Entropy has increased. However, if you have a computation that can be run backwards, then it doesn't increase entropy. So this works wonderfully well on paper, and you can actually, in principle, build the physical systems for it. And there are actually good reasons to try to do it in order to keep the heat emissions down. And there is a theorem by Bennett showing that irreversible computations can be turned into reversible ones at a slight cost. And the slight cost whenever a computer scientist says that, of course, you should run away, because that can be very big. This one, I think, is just polynomial, so it's not too terrible. But it's still, it's not trivial to do it. But in a very cold, dark universe, I think that would be a perfect place to do a lot of reversible computation. So what I found is lower bounds. We're going to be possible to do quite a lot of much more, but it's...
Thank you very much, Anders. Thank you very much. So in introducing the next speaker, we're going to talk about the law and the kind of singularity. That Marta is not here this afternoon because she has been very interested. I want to mention a couple of things first. These are two Italian scientists affiliated with ILABS, which is an Italian engineering organization, which in turn is affiliated with the network of Italian TransVision. And you have heard our comments yesterday about this little tension between two different Italian TransVision organizations. Not with this talk, we have had 3 speakers from one organization, 3 speakers from the other organization, which maybe gives some substance to what Giuseppe Latino was saying yesterday, that perhaps this event that marks the beginning of collaboration between the Italian Transhumanists Association and the network of Italian transhumanists, and I'd like to add my voice to this hope raised by Giuseppe. You will have noticed that another member of A, Stefano Vai, who was with us yesterday and the day before, is not with us today. As you know, he's not with us today because he's still recovering from the major surgery last week, and he's best to be with us on the first day of the conference, even if he was not with help. So I'd like to invite everyone to applaud Stefano. Thank you very much. This I'd like to give the floor to Marta, Rossi, and Jacopo Tagliabue. The talk will be half in Italian and English, mainly Italian. They will summarize the main points in English.
Buon pomeriggio a tutti, faremo più o meno metà presentazione in italiano e metà in inglese. Diciamo che alla fine della mia diapositiva la mia stesa ripeterà in inglese, cercherà di riassumere i punti fondamentali. Siamo Marta, Rossi e Fiorella Terenzi e l'obiettivo di oggi è quello di affrontare un argomento che, almeno in questi termini, in termini di cui andremo a parlarne oggi, è stato molto poco trattato anche dagli addetti ai lavori. L'argomento è appunto la legge della singolarità e brevemente si tratta di indagare i rapporti tra la singolarità tecnologica e l'amministrazione della giustizia.
I am going to translate each slide, so just for the English-speaking word. And basically, what we're seeing now is Marta, Rossi, and Jacopo Tagliabue. We are from ILABS, that's a laboratory based in Milan and founded in 1977. And the point we're trying to make today is that there's a strong connection between we approaching the singularity and how the law and the administration of justice would be in this kind of works. We're going to explore some opportunities and to maybe explicit some challenges we're going to face in this process.
Davanti al questo pubblico occorre spendere fortunatamente solo poche parole e ridurre la parte, diciamo, generale del fondamentalmente, se Raymond Wolfe e ormai molti ricercatori e scienziati hanno ragione, ci troveremo ad avere circa nel 2060, magari Jacopo spiegherà meglio, non c'è bisogno di spiegarlo troppo, un momento proprio di singolarità in cui esperiremo un cambiamento tanto a livello sia individuale che a livello di società in cui andremo a vivere. E in base a questo è bene, dal nostro punto di vista, provare a fare delle previsioni.
So, as you've seen, the graph is very famous graphics by, made popular by Raymond Kurzweil's work. So, the main point is that if the accelerating trend in technology will continue, we are going to experience a singularity at around 2060 or something like that. But the main point that since this will be such as a parallel moment of change, as unprecedented, movement in our life, it's going to be very important to start thinking today about what is going to be our life as individual, as part of our society in that period. So I think it's very important to think this kind of relationship between individual and society starting from now.
Sì, come ovvio che sia, la maggior parte dei ricercatori e degli scienziati che si sono occupati di fare delle previsioni più o meno accurate nelle varie aree di ricerca si sono occupati giustamente più degli aspetti prettamente scientifici e tecnologici di quello che succederà con l'avvento della singolarità. Dalla fisica, all'avvicinarsi sempre maggiore di un livello più accurato di descrizione della realtà che ci circonda, alla medicina, nanotecnologie, sistemi di trapianti, staminali e via così, intelligenza artificiale sia applicata teorica, le nuove ricerche del mind uploading o le nuovissime ricerche di intelligenza artificiale teorica sul coscienziometro, quindi sul modello di livelli di coscienza. Dal nostro punto di vista sono stati un po' trascurati totalmente due aspetti, tre, che dal nostro punto di vista sono abbastanza essenziali. Dal punto di vista prettamente filosofico, ad esempio, per quanto riguarda le tesi della filosofia della mente, che molti di voi conosceranno, in particolare Andy Clark e David Chalmers, sono qualche spunto da veramente poco nell'associare la teoria della mente estesa con il concetto di singolarità stessa. In base a queste tesi ovviamente il problema etico è fortissimo, perché potete immaginare che se l'io si perde, qualsiasi cosa voglia dire questa parola, alcuni concetti come il concetto di responsabilità, criteri di individuazione dei soggetti nel mondo delle variazioni vengono in qualche modo messi diciamo un po' in difficoltà, quantomeno andrebbero ripensati. In particolare l'aspetto della società, inteso nei rapporti di amministrazione della giustizia, quindi comportamento della legge, sono stati quello che noi cercheremo, almeno per questa prima parte, di raccontarvi.
So, as you see from the Blade Runner picture here, so we all know the future will bring us such a marvel in all kind of disciplines. So we have physics, and we should be able to finally have theory of everything. We have medicine, resulting in a radical extension of human lifespan. Then we have artificial intelligence and philosophy, mainly the latest development philosophy of mind, like for example the mind extended thesis was put forward by and its relationship to subjects such as ethics and individual responsibility, because we are already we are already tolerating sort of fragmentation of our ego in many like tools and many devices around us due to technologies, but will probably just like this kind of fragmentation is going to grow exponentially as we go into the future. So there will be a relationship to explore between extended mind, responsibility, and taking action in a world where our mind is extended. And finally, of course, that's the main point of today's talks, it's the law. So how the administration of the law, how the very idea of laws will change as soon as we go into the future.
Allora, tradizionalmente l'amministrazione della giustizia ha due aspetti fondamentali. Un aspetto formale, in cui che fondamentalmente codifica l'idea di quale sia il metodo più corretto per indagare, gestire e osservare le procedure, definire i rapporti tra ciò che viene considerato reato, a prescindere da quello che è, e le varie punizioni associate al reato, quindi i vari vincoli dell'azione. E un aspetto più sostanziale che invece ha a che fare con cosa, ovvero che cosa si intende per reato e quali sono di fatto i vincoli all'azione, quali vincoli scegliere. Brevemente, questo punto è fondamentale perché se ipotizziamo un futuro, come ci siamo detti, fondamentalmente per realtà della ricerca, se è bene, se è molto probabile dare un futuro in cui l'aspetto formale unisce fondamentalmente tutte le varie possibili società che nasceranno, eccetera, eccetera. Sull'aspetto sostanziale il discorso dell'univocità sarà abbastanza complicato perché ovviamente a seconda di come noi, di cosa noi indichiamo per reati, quindi che cosa si intende, si prefigge una certa società, scopo si prefigge, quindi a seconda di come vorrà avvicinarsi a tale scopo verranno schemati sia i vincoli all'azione che le conseguenti punizioni. Quindi per quanto riguarda la parte formale ipotizziamo un futuro abbastanza uguale per tutti, dal punto di vista sostanziale possono essere delle previsioni più o meno accurate, ma il compenso è abbastanza difficile da definire a livello generale.
So we are going to distinguish two different like levels when talking about the law. One is more like a formal level, so that means it's only concerned with the fact that you find optimal procedures to individuate like a crime, to precisely define what a crime is and assign to every crime what you say a just punishment or something like that. It's just formal because of course two people can agree what is a perfect method to pursue this kind of goal, but they cannot agree about what is a crime and which are the that should be preserved in a society. So the previous talk was about like future civilization, like very, very far in the future. We like more modest and down to earth, but what we can safely say is that like in 50 or 100 years, maybe there will be like very different societies with a common formal definition of what a crime should be recognized and should be punished, but very different definition of what a crime is. So what values are and what should be preserved and defended, and what instead can be like offended and broken. So we will be in this talk we will be more concerned with the formal aspects of the aspect that is going to be like shared future society.
Dal punto di vista prettamente formale, il desiderato che dobbiamo presentare è quello, discutibile o meno, di avere il concetto di giustizia strettamente collegato al concetto di algoritmo. Altre parole, a parità di condizioni, fatti, contesto, conoscenza, eccetera, eccetera, il giudizio sulle azioni simili deve essere il medesimo. Questo è il concetto fondamentale su cui si può discutere, ma fondamentalmente è la base di tutto dei lavori che stiamo facendo. Quindi il concetto è eliminare l'elemento soggettivo dal giudizio e dall'amministrazione della giustizia, in maniera sia a livello formale sia a livello sostanziale, ma fondamentalmente a livello formale. La diagnosi della mancanza di giustizia come algoritmo attualmente, dal nostro punto di vista, si rifà a due fattori, il fattore umano e il fattore legislativo.
So basically what we put forward as a formal desideratum of each and every theory of justice is that if you have given that the facts and all the relevant knowledge about an event are between two events are the same, so the related decision by a judge should be the same. So it should be okay, you're innocent, or should be okay, you should be punished. But in any case, if two people just do the same things, they should get anytime they should get the same very decision from the judge. What we expect now is that this is not always the case, and basically because of two different factors. The first, the human factor. So judges are human persons. They have cognitive bias. They have emotions, and they can make mistakes, and they can introduce subjective opinion into the administration of the laws. And the other is the law factor. That is the fact that the law, I mean, we come from different countries, but we can speak at least for the Italian laws, is not made in a very unambiguous and precise way, but actually it's very ambiguous and very vague, so it invites the judge to introduce subjective elements into the judgment process.
Quindi, appunto, partendo brevemente italiano, il fattore umano ha a che fare con il fatto che i giudici di fatto sono persone come tutti noi, quindi soggetti a errori sia cognitivi che razionalità nelle decisioni, sia a errori causati dall'emotività, e un fattore legislativo che ha a che fare appunto con il nostro corpo legislativo come è costituito, che strutturalmente è ambiguo per definizione e diciamo soggetto a interpretazione. Quindi si fa fatica anche a un giudice, diciamo, ipotizziamo un giudice particolarmente brillante, particolarmente bravo e azzerato il più possibile errori di tipo cognitivo e emotivo, si troverebbe comunque a dover lavorare con un sistema legislativo abbastanza difficile da gestire e da rendere oggettivo. L'ipotesi di lavoro è che soltanto con l'avvento della singolarità sarà possibile sistemare anche quest'area della ricerca. In fondamentalmente tre aspetti. Un'intelligenza artificiale investigativa in grado cioè di misurare in modo completo ovviamente i comportamenti e le azioni, che diventano l'unica area nel giudicare appunto nel giudizio di un'azione di comportamento. Un'intelligenza artificiale giudicante che sarà più o meno a tutti i livelli, un cyber giudice, possiamo chiamarlo, che dati certi input produca sempre determinati output, un sistema artificiale, e tutto questo sarebbe inutile se non ci fosse un'intelligenza artificiale analitica umana per costituire una nuova legge rigorosa e computabile da dare in pasto al cyber giudice.
So what we claim, building on the premise in the slide, is that this situation, the fact that we are very satisfied with how the law and justice is administered today, can be like, it's not like a contingent fact. It will stay with us till we reach singularity or we approach singularity. And this is because only the use of artificial intelligence can really make us make the leap between the imperfect administration justice and a perfect, from a formal point of view, administration justice. So basically, we individuated three milestones, three tools that you should invent to make the situation better, to improve our justice. So the first one is the detective AI. I don't know if it makes sense, but that means basically the fact that we can ask artificial intelligence tools and expert system to see what's really going on in a situation. So if you don't know what happened yesterday, we can have very good detective that can have computational powers and a lot of knowledge to let us know what's really happened in a crime scene or something. The second thing that's probably the key thing is the cyber judge. I mean, an expert system whose purpose is to take as input all the relevant facts about an event and then to produce the final judgment without any subjective ingredient or any emotion or any cognitive bias, just like an algorithm. So you have to devise a very complicated algorithm and to implement it in a computer to see if any fact is compatible with the laws or not, and to get the result in like a few minutes, like here in Italy, well, like in 10 years or 15 years to get judgment or something. And finally, this would be useless unless humans, before the machines, devise a way to build a new law, a completely new law, under the constraint that it should be perfectly compatible. Because if you don't understand that computability is a formal prerequisite of any possible future perfect law, we end up just replicating mistakes we have been doing in the last 50 years. So producing a code and laws that are very vague and that cannot be processed automatically. So with these three tools, we can think that we can really fix the gap between what is the imperfect administration of law now and what would be the perfect administration of law approaching singularity.
Indipendentemente cerchiamo di fare una cosa più per tutta in inglese che con così almeno insomma.
Okay, so very quick. I'm going to like address 4 challenges. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list by any standard, but it's just 4 questions that comes to mind when you start thinking about this framework of the long data singularity. So we have basically the first problem. There is the problem of computability. So if we said that okay, we can have just a perfect law if we have computable laws, but of course we know that not everything is computable because there are limitative results. Back in the 30s, that you cannot compute everything. So how can you? What is the trade-off? How can you solve the problem? And our answer is basically that the computation required to administer the law, so the detective IA, the cyber judge, it's going to be the computation is going to be perfectly computable because we are going to assume that we are living in a digital universe. That means we're going to assume that Ed Franklin or Wolfram or other people that propose the model of universe as a cellular automata are basically right. So we're going to assume that reality is discrete at its fundamental level, both in space and both in time, and so the nature is finite. So the amount of information contained by me is finite. So that guarantees that you can have a computable universe. So the second is very frequent, especially among the laymen, is that it guarantees you that when you build artificial intelligence, this will be like benevolent. You should not take all the birds and maybe kill all humans or something like that. And the answer is that I don't think you can be sure about what will be like, what that intelligent machine will do. What we can know is that if we are able to develop cognitive enhancement for humans, just as we develop a more intelligent machine, is unlikely that machine will be like much better than human when they get some consciousness on something like that. So there will be not really 2 classes of system, one which is much powerful than the other, but we should have something like equal classes. So it will be not productive for machines to make war to humans because we will be like kind of similar. So it will be it will be more productive to seek in collaboration between the 2 classes. And third, this is very quick, is the mind extending problem that Marta introduced before, is the very fact that we're going to tolerate fragmentation in egos. We are going to at least partially define what is going to be being responsible for an action, because it's not like you're just responsible for your own bodies and you're like very proximal part of you, but you're going to be responsible of very remote part of yourself and their behavior maybe in other universe or so on. So this would be like a very fertile field for philosophers of mind and ethics to explore what kind of future scenarios are possible in this respect. And finally, to conclude, and maybe this is the most practical advice we're going to give today, is what we call principle of inversion. So basically, an objection may be, okay, if you start making judgment completely automatic, if you start just letting the computer decide what is right and what is wrong, you're going to almost eliminate all the subjective point of view in human agency, because everything becomes perfectly objective. Everything becomes just you did it, or you did this, or you did that, and then from that you are going to deduce the punishment. So you're going to erase a big part of what today is the law, that is intentions, that is what an agent wants to bring about with his action. In our view, this is, we take the objection and showing that the current understanding of the law is flawed. So we believe that in the near future, intentions, so what an agent would want to bring about with his action, are going to completely disappear from how the law is administered. So basically the point is really objective. So what you're going to see is that if you make me some kind of damage and to quantify that damage independently of any consideration about what you wanted to do when you take your action. So you're not going to be blamed more if you wanted to make me a damage, or be blamed less if you didn't want to make damage. So the other point is that the first perspective is the victim. So from the point of view is that you have to compensate the victim for eventually for the damage you made. So if it is true that the subjective part of agency will be completely eradicated from how the justice is now administered, for us this is a very good part of the proposal. This is a normal part of how the law should be administered. So the victim point is the first part, and then we can see what we can do with to the people who caused damage in the first place. So I think that's all, and maybe if you have some questions, we can.
Before everyone starts asking questions, because this is the very technical issue that usually a lot of data about this. I would invite everyone to depend on the fact that the email address of Marta and Jacopo is written here, and ask one or maximum 2 questions to leave time for the rest of the program. So who has the first question? Giuseppe.
Io faccio in italiano. Questa idea del danno però è un caso di omicidio abbastanza significativo, che può essere intenzionale, colposo, volontario. Come diciamo riuscire a questa situazione?
Sì, anche questo. So the question was that take for example homicide, and nowadays we used to distinguish when an homicide is committed with the purpose to commit homicide, and when it's committed like by accident or as a side effect or other action. So how can this model handle this kind of thing?
La nostra risposta è abbastanza semplice, si perde la differenza. L'unica cosa che conta davvero è il risultato. Quindi ciò che è successo, indipendentemente dall'intenzione. Cioè l'effetto, la parte intenzionale, quindi pensiero, percezione, quell'area in cui che non è direttamente visibile se non negli effetti, è totalmente eliminata.
Quindi dove disposizione aveste? Omicidio per esempio colposo oppure intenzionale, distinguendo, cioè una pena massima e minima?
Questo sarà ovviamente all'infinito. Cioè, tralasciamoci, certo. No, certo. Sì.
So the answer is that basically we take this at face value, so we don't distinguish more. We're not going to distinguish between these two kind of like homicide by accident and homicide by purpose, because there's of course this poses problem. This makes problem for the actual conceive our action as human, but think about a future where our cognitive power and the computational power is re-enhanced. So there will be no more excuses for me not to be like aware of the unintended consequences of my action. So because my ability to predict the future based on my current experience will be much more higher. So the damage that I cause is much more heavier for society. It's really a problem. So.
It opens a very problematic situation, because a crime can be committed right now if people live, like say, 100 years from now. So then certain consumption patterns and certain behavioral patterns right now might be considered construed to be a crime. For instance, someone who really powerfully consumes or is manager of an oil industry might 50 years from now, by logical calculation, be regarded as being criminal. And that person might be held accountable, have to pay for severe crimes.
Yes, so what's the objection to this kind of...
This is an implication, basically, what you're saying.
Okay.
Is that true, or am I mistaken?
So I'm not sure I get the point. So the point is that if you can predict that
if you
the analogy made now
if you can
will
make
result.
a very careful analysis of crimes in this manner, put an AI to calculate crimes, and have come to a sort of a perfect statistical analysis of what a crime is, and a perfect or optimal ethical ideal of analysis, and you combine it with the fact that maybe some of these people might live more than 100 years, then people right here might be held accountable to crimes which we can't even define yet, or which are plausible but rather abstract from our perspective.
So you're going to say that we are kind of committed to the idea that we like some sort of minority reporting, like with the fact that we can predict, like starting from now, that what is going to be, so they can be held accountable now. From
say you buy a lot of articles from China. 50 years ago, you are held accountable for being accomplice to slavery.
That's retroactive.
Correct?
That's a retroactive law.
No, you can create crimes after the fact. You can create, for instance, if someone dumps a new toxic substance.
I think the issue has been taken.
Yeah.
Let's not make a debate out of it because we will stay here until tomorrow. I think Didier wants to make a comment, but make it quick. Otherwise, we are going to have another quick comment from Riccardo, and after that, we are going to have a question from Natasha Vitamore in the virtual audience, and that's it. So Didier first.
I will try to be short. Just for me, it's a very strange idea that you are doing as a conclusion. And on the other side, technology will be possible to detect if the person, what is your detecting if the person is lying or not. So why don't you choose this solution to be more to have new technologies to make it possible to know if the person is lying or not, and so to have more justice.
Actually, we think that the point of lying is very important in the future society, and we touch the substantial point of view, and we just make the formal. But we believe that the first principle in the new society will be to never to lie, because if you're going to be in a future where our knowledge of the world will be constantly enhanced and improved, so the most important damage you can do to society is to lie, so to describe reality as it's not. So of course, a lot of technology will help us bring us there. So what we're saying is that if we detect that you're lying, that doesn't make you ipso facto punishable. That makes ipso facto make you make evident that you make a damage to me. So this is part of the detective eye tools that we were thinking about. So a machine that detects that if you lie is very important, as well as a machine that detects if you were in a room like yesterday or whatever. So it's part of the big picture of the use of technology to aid the administration of law.
One question.
Make it very quick.
All right. Interesting talk. Thank you. From the viewpoint of me as a lawyer, you shouldn't. There's one. You recognize that that there will be sort of a meeting between machine capability and human capability through enhanced means. Who knows will say this judgment whether it be enhanced humans or tin cans. But these will be subject to fraud. These will be subject to accountability. I sort of admire your strive towards perfection and your will for the perfect law in formal argument. But whether this is attainable still remains to be seen, I think.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we don't prove that this kind of picture is really coherent, it's finer grained in detail. What I can say to you is that if you're going to pursue your thought and to even achieve 1/10 of the thing will be a real improvement in our work. So maybe it's worth trying this tree, because even if we cannot attain the final goal, we have always to just gain about this kind of consideration. And even if we cyber judge, the massive use of expert system in the administration of law could be really useful nonetheless. So I mean, if we're very lucky, we can end up with the whole picture. But even if we get a fraction of it, I think it's worth it.
A good answer to the emphasize.
Excuse me. We are not going to have a debate because we don't have time. Right? Floor to Riccardo for the next.
Very quickly, I agree with this point of view. I started my career as a philosopher, and I was writing about trying to build a system of their own logic to any other more important philosopher than me, like others, or a logical system. And the final conclusion after many years of working is that this is impossible. In the sense that it's really, at least now, of course, in the future, maybe we will have better brains and better machines, but at the moment, we cannot create a machine out of the system. But then I would like to thank you for this intervention, because basically, sometimes when people talk about the singularity, they talk about like paradise on earth, and they don't even take into account the fact that there will be criminals, or new crimes, or other types of behavior that some like it, or other people don't like it, do not like it. I remember, for instance, Frank Hitler speculating about the opposite point. I don't know if you read his books, so I don't know if it's in the singularity or something similar, and he was questioned by a journalist on, and I asked him, so machines, your super intelligent machine resurrects everybody in the future. You remember, you know about Hitler, and he said, yes, of course. And the question of journalists about, will he resurrect also criminals? I don't know, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, so what's going on then inside the machine? And he was really, and they think about it. Well, maybe yes, but we should modify these characters, you know. So I was really very about it. The thing is, I don't think that we will have this progress on Earth. So it's good, it's interesting talks about crimes and problems.
Thank you very much for the comment, Riccardo. We have to move on. We have one more question from Natasha Vitamor in the internet office, and then we have to move on to the rest of the program. Can you read Natasha's question?
Yes. Natasha asks, we often speak of unintended consequences. However, with AGI, it seems that intended consequences are of equal significance. How do you view consequences in building the architecture for our future and its laws?
Basically, I think this is like some sort of continuity between this question and a question by Giuseppe. So the point is that we're not denying the fact that there's a difference between unintended consequences and intended consequences. And we're not saying that this will play in our future. What we're saying is we know that it's something strong, but we're saying that this difference will play no role in how the law will be administered, so in our view of justice. So what we'll say is that since we are taking out first the victim point, so the fact that it gets damaged or did not get damaged, so the intended consequence or unintended consequence of the people that make in the first place the action are irrelevant to the fact that damage should be someone who paid for, or that someone who made damage should punish. Okay.
Is that it? She had to read one little bit more.
We were talking all night, right? Okay, I think
This was the answer.
Your chance, let him read it. Can you read it for me?
Her answer is, so he's saying that behavior is significant and looking at law as black and white, and I meant to say intention. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all for Natasha. We are not going to have a time to have a debate here. I would like just to add that my own opinion is not very different from that just as Natasha. But I want to say thank you very, 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 very much, Marta and Jacopo. Now, it is very evident that many people wanted to say something and we didn't have time. This is an issue very hot and is going to become hotter and hotter. The emails and the Jacopo are here. Marta and Jacopo, timelapse.it. I think you will accept even questions from participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, now I have to my speaker, and in order to save time, I'll try to do some parallel processing and doing it while I load the next presentation at the same time. Speaker is Randal A, who is normally who is usually associated with the idea of mind uploading. We have been discussing a lot of mind uploading in these days, and Randal has recently coined some new terminology for this. He has been speaking of advancing substrate independent minds, which is the name of a problem, a very interesting one, which has been done under the umbrella of a foundation that has been set up called Carbon Company. Randal, you have the floor. Here, please. You're familiar with Marta, so I think I should go to slideshow mode and just use the access.
Okay. Okay, hi. Actually, I'm feeling quite bad that I haven't so many of the other talks before this, because when I was just listening to the talks that I just happened to listen to, they're quite interesting. So I'm going to make sure that everything I was 26 hours as headline, I'm going to look at the recording and find what was there. So as Julia already said, usually people expect me to talk about advancing substrate independent mind of a whole elimination, something like that. And I'm really happy that this time I have a chance to talk about something more specific, just because it's fun to do. So I'm a 25-watt biocomputer. And what are the hacks that make us who we are? Oh, using page down, it's not happening.
No, right.
Right?
No?
No, nothing.
Oh.
Being special. Okay. Oh, I guess I'm like that. So. Yes, that doesn't seem good.
Yes, it's the problem is not the relation at all.
Yeah. Oh, I should press function as well. Okay. Yeah. This is Macintosh is going backwards from this using one button. Right. So what are these hacks? Oh, and now it goes. Oh, the function that brings me to the very end. Ah, this is good. Okay. So why emphasize minds? I'm sorry if I mumble or if you can't hear or if you understand something, just say so. I know the audience is largely Italian, so English is not their native language.
No.
It's not?
Mostly English.
Oh, mostly English. Yeah, interesting. Well, nevertheless, interrupt me when you like, because I like those kinds of talks where I get interrupted. I'm just powering through. So I wanted to start just by backtracking a little bit on why anything doesn't here, transhumanism, for example. Why do we do this? Well, one reason to do it is the type of then and enable more. Be aware of stuff, protect ourselves against risks. We want to continue to grow and to learn many things, and we still want to be able to relate to other entities or to things outside of ourselves. And now the question is, why do any of these things matter? Why do we care about living longer or continuing our growth and things like that? Basically, it's because we perceive. And that's, of course, not something new. Leibniz already made this a very important point to consider, perceiving and perception, and how does it work. And, well, obviously this is something that happens in the mind. So I think that basically everything we're striving for is it carries on, it goes on in our minds, and that's the most important aspect as well. Every time you perceive something, a bunch of things start being processed in there, a complex situation. There are some original drives that are inside us, biological drives that have been put there through evolution, and together this processing and the drives that are driving us to do a certain thing, to have certain goals, leads us to carry on actions that are the consequences of what we see. And all of this together, one thing that emerges from this is, for example, self-awareness. This concept that we're aware of what's going on around us, that these perceptions relate to some sort of self, and that we are then acting as self on the universe around us. Now, there's a whole school of thought that says that this is an illusion, that self-awareness, consciousness, those things, they're not real, they're emergent phenomena. I'm not actually against that. In fact, I'm probably in that school. It's just that I don't quite see the point. Are they any more illusory than anything else that we even into in the mind? Is there anything about other general functions that we can give a nice definition that is not an emergent thing, that is not something illusory in that sense? Take John Searle's argument about the Chinese. It's a kind of a little tangent, but it's always important from the AI point of view. Okay, there's this little person sitting in the room, maybe it's a big person, translating Chinese just by following the rules. And then the counter-argument against John Searle, who says that this shows that computers can never really understand something, is that, well, why are you putting a person in there? That's kind of a, that's totally fake to do that, because you can't take a part of this mind, say the neuron, and assume that it's itself a person to understand everything that's going on. That's one way of looking at it. So again, there's this dichotomy between emergent functions, giving it a name and thinking it's something very. So what is this self-stuff? Self-stuff, I don't think there is any self-stuff. There's no secret ingredient any more than there was an animated spirit that made things alive, which was, of course, a hot topic of debate a century, 2 centuries ago. And so there's really, this is where we're saying there's not something mystical about it. There's no secret ingredient. There are a set of observed or perceived characteristics. Okay, these are what we know of. And then we give them some shared concepts, some definition of what they are. And once we do that, we start to identify things like that. We identify things that are alive, that are thinking, self-aware. And once you start doing that, then you can start to imbue that with unique mystique. And that's where things start getting into it, because then you've got the, oh, is there something special about self-awareness? Okay, but the point here is what emerges here depends on the observer to classify it. It's because we happen to classify it like this that we say self-awareness is something special, something in particular that we'd like to preserve, do something. Okay, so what? Are our goals, desires, or interests any more or less significant or influential with regard to our actions depending on whether there is the mystery or illusion? So this is what I'm kind of getting towards in the first part of this talk, which is, do we need to care about why we're striving for goals we're striving for? Does it really matter in the end whether something like that is an illusion, whether it's self-awareness, or whether it is? And I'm echoing David Chalmers here. If consciousness is an illusion, then the illusion is consciousness. Basically, it doesn't matter, because this is what we do anyway. I mean, this is just, we can choose a local purpose. There is no universal purpose, but we can choose local purposes. Okay, so given that that is something that matters to us, even though we can't give it a really refined universal reason why it matters to us, then why do we want to understand today? Because knowledge is power. Whatever you understand more, you can leverage, you can use it better, you can improve it. And this means that we can get more out of our being and out of this stuff that we care about so much. For example, there's the argument about augmentation. We can improve the extent of our being, by that I mean we can survive longer. And, well, this is basically the end of the first part of the talk. Let's start to learn what we can learn about the mind to get us there. Understand more about it, implement more, copy more, extend more, and diversify. Okay, so 2. How is the brain significant to this? I was just talking about the mind. I like to make a difference between the two, even, with my background and everything. I try to keep those two separate. Only separate insofar as I see the brain as an implementation of mind. I see the brain as an implementation of mind, a way of implementing functions, a certain kind of part. Okay, so thinking about thinking is basically what we're doing, because now we care about how mind works, we want to understand something about it, maybe learn something from it. What happens when you start to care about something is that a whole bunch of fields of research start to emerge. And to name a few, we have here psychology, psychiatry, where psychiatry, of course, is about what goes wrong in minds, what goes right, and why does it go right or wrong. Psychology, linguistics, and cognitive science, which you could call high-level approaches that look at the high-level characteristic of mind. And those are really interesting, because high-level kind of stuff that matters to us in our lives. It's the kind of thing that we deal with on a daily basis. So, if you've ever read Deutsch's book, then you can see that he would agree that you don't only look at physics to understand what subatomic thing, because it's really hard to understand why World War II if you just look at subatomic particles. So you need to know something about high-level things. You know it. Okay, I thought it was somebody else.
No. Louder.
Louder.
These are important things they need to say loud. You see what I mean?
Just bring the microphone a little bit closer.
Okay, let's try getting a little closer.
No, the microphone.
This is the mic. Okay, just keep it right down. Okay. Then area neuroscience, which is more my area, computational neuroscience, in fact, and then neuroinformatics, which is more the novel version of computational neuroscience. In which case, it's about understanding what mechanisms make it work. You're diving a little deeper. And then, on the other hand, instead of thinking about thinking from the point of view of how does it work inside this gray matter that's inside our brains, there's the artificial intelligence approach. Other things like embodied cognition of bodies. Pattern recognition, machine learning, probabilistic computing, which in this case are mechanisms for formal architecture, whereas artificial intelligence itself are ways of describing in a formal, pure way how to implement high-level characteristics of thinking. Okay, so this is what it all split out into. The brain. So what's so special about the brain? One useful thing about the brain is that it exists. And that's something that is often forgotten, believe it or not. When I talk to people who do a lot of AI, I sometimes think that they've forgotten the brain exists. And I don't mean this is a bad thing, because they can't from another angle. And I can get back to that later. It also appears to work. At least it works for the kinds of things that we cared about back in the Stone Age, and to some degree still for the things that we care about now. Those are two really important advantages, because you've got a system there that you can actually look at, and that seems to work to a certain degree. So let's see what the brain's comments are about these fields I've just described. Okay, psychiatry. Well, the brain can help us find out what we need to know about brain health, to actually examine the brain, learn something about it. Using the brain as an example in psychology and science, we can use this as a way to understand ourselves, to understand better why we do things that we do. And in neuroscience, well, obviously, this is the place you can look at the action mechanisms underlying thinking, the kind of mechanisms you implement to do these things, to do that in thought process. And then, well, the artificial intelligence here, it all the brain. First of all, you can use this to compare. If you work in artificial intelligence, you're trying to do machines, you can compare what your machine and what humans do. And obviously, you have a human chess player that gets to do things like that. There are other things you can do as well. And mostly, the brain has taught us a lot of interesting tricks that are now used in intelligence. For example, the origin of distributed computing, the origin of the notion of probabilistic reasoning, the origin of the concept of reinforcement learning, the origin of the subdivision of memory and types of representations. There are other influences there as well, but the brain was an example that showed us that we can use all these principles for thinking. And then, of course, if you have brains comments, you always have pinkies comments. I don't know if you know this, but this is a very popular cartoon in the United States. So, pinkies comments. Well, but it's so messy. That's sad. It's true. There is no single algorithm for general intelligence in the brain. But is it really that diverse? Well, I think it probably is. It's certainly not the result of having designed something according to one specific set of principles. But it does have the same goal. Each iteration of brains, let's say from early simple brains in vertebrates to the brains that we see in primates to brains that we have, they all serve the goal of survival, but in changing conditions. And the most important aspect of those changing conditions has been that your competitors are getting better. So it's all in an area of competition. The brains are not optimized to be general, to be best in all circumstances. Instead, they developed according to orders path optimization. You're simply adding something that makes you a little bit better. This sort of adaptation through augmentation, which is really not much different than when we augment ourselves now, well, it's not the same as a cautious approach where you say if you make the best general system, it'll always work in every other circumstance, and then you can try to optimize within that circumstance. But the good thing is that the way evolution works, only the winners are around, so we don't really have the losers to contend with, and so the principle seems to work fairly well in an environment where the things are right. Okay, the path of diversity. This is really getting down into what I'm trying to talk about right here. Well, what kind of diversity do we see? Here's some examples. The brain is really not artificial intelligence with a simple algorithm. We see many different cell types, many different kinds of operation, different sorts of signaling. For example, muscles are generally controlled by sort of a sum of vectors that tell the muscle which direction to move in. You've got different signals that are being added on in the vector. With respiratory sensing, where a single spike can indicate very important information about frequency of the signal that just heard. There are different kinds of representations. In some areas, highly distributed. You could shoot a bullet through part of the brain, and you will forget only part of what you need, and you won't forget all of it. Like maybe your memory of what the grandmother looked like is a little more vague, but you could still recognize her. Whereas in other areas, it's a very sparse representation. You basically have grandmother cells, those cells that are indicators for contact with grandmother. And why that is, well, there are different reasons for it, but just a second. There are also different arrangements. You have different parts of the system. Like you have the older limbic system, the newer neocortex, that have completely different parts. And you see that in different species, for example, in an area like, say, the neocortex, you see that they have different layers. You'll see within brain regions in our whole brain that we have different arrangements. For example, just counting the number of layers, in some areas of our brain we have 5, and in some we have 6. So, one important question is, are we just adding refinements, as in, are we adding new, better, refined systems to the old system and keeping what's there, like the limbic system in place for backward compatibility? So does that stay the same and then just add other parts? Okay, so something changed that was just moved. Now I can page forward. Maybe the USB drive was important.
I thought you were not running it from USB. They copied it with.
Maybe it is.
No, I think it was just a phone.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Thanks. Okay. So the next slide. Recycle. So it's really not just a matter of adding new systems by keeping the old ones where they work. As an example, let's look at the hippocampus, which is an area that I studied a lot, so it's easy for me to talk about. In rats, when we talk about the hippocampus, we're mostly talking about spatial ability, learning about spaces and running around, things like that. And it seems it's very important towards those tasks. But in other animals, and especially in higher primates, I mean, humans, we see that the hippocampus is involved in all sorts of interesting tasks, mostly in acquisition of declarative memory, which is a really important thing to us. Declarative memory is, of course, this kind of memory where we can really pick on something, really pick out an item that we want to think about and use it. So it's not like procedural memory where we learn how to play piano and we can just do it. It's the memory that we think about, that we act on consciously. So this ancient system helps us to develop concepts and is therefore crucial for some of what we consider the human forms of intelligence. So this is the hippocampus is a limbic system. It's one of the older ones. But it works together with the neocortex, which is basically like a huge reservoir of computing environment that classify and carry out tasks where you classify concepts like that. It's part of the automated and unsupervised mechanism that we use to deal with grounding problems. So together, this helps us deal with new concepts, add new concepts, associate with one another, keep those that we care about in term storage, etc. And just to show you how complicated it gets, I'm showing you here how declarative memory is acquired. And I've tried to describe that in 3 dimensions, the where, as in how is it stored in the brain, is it local or is it distributed? And in terms of mechanisms, what kind of strange mechanisms are using to store memory? And in terms of the time period, how long does it last? Well, you see the first green box, short-term memory, this is based on, well, first of all, you've got input that's coming in at arbitrary intervals. You don't know if things are going to happen 1 second apart, or if there's going to be now, then an event 5 minutes from now, and an event an hour from now. Somehow you need to be able to relate these things over different periods of time. You need to somehow stack time together and still keep events ordered. And there are mechanisms to do this using rhythmic activity that don't depend at all on synapses, for instance. So I'm actually going to show an example of that in a second. Then you've got the intermediate term memory in the hippocampus, which is using chemical storage, LTP, long-term attention, and coincidental recruitment to establish new habits, together with the dentate gyrus, which has this wonderful property that there's a lot of neurogenesis going on there. So you have a lot of fresh cells that aren't associated with anything. It's very happy at associations. They can be concept tasks. And then we're going further in time. This is now the LTP phase, whereas the short-term memory lasted only for seconds and minutes. Then you get to, well, storage. You want to store this intermediate term memory somewhere for long-term. And to do that, we'll use a replay of the memory. And this happens, for example, while you're sleep, we have slow wave sleep. The same activity, same patterns are reactivated in the hippocampus, and they take place in the same order, but they're interleaved with other activity that's happening in the brain. And so we get this reactivation that allows the memories to be transferred, established elsewhere, which eventually leads to change that are not just chemical, but are also morphological, where new synapses are grown. So you see in long-term memory that there are actual morphological changes in the brain, last a lot longer, and they can basically connect anything in any part of the brain with any other part of the brain. So very different systems. Okay, yeah, that's good. This is just a quick slide showing you the short-term memory buffer. This happens to be something that I modeled for a while, and how it works, because it's totally different from what we used to see in artificial intelligence, totally different from what we normally think about in computing, how it works. What we have here are, well, if you look at the middle graph, you just see that there are a bunch of spikes, and you can change the mode in which the neuron operates. Usually it will spike only once or 2 times after it's received input, but if you give it acetylcholine, it can spike persistently. So you can change it to different type of eyes. And then on the left, all these colorful little lines show you what happens when you receive input at a certain time. You're receiving then something happens, there's a pattern that occurs. And these cycling neurons, they can keep that active without having any synaptic connections, any pre-existing synaptic connections. That's very important. Trying to acquire new memory because you don't know what you're supposed to acquire for us. And you can multiple patterns going at the same time in the same order because of a certain arrangement of how they have looked. Which is why now it sustains activity at the same time as it blocks. It blocks the activity from just going on continuously because there are these other cells, injury, that will cause activity to die down after you add to the center spikes. So I'm not going to go into more detail about that. You see that this is quite different than you might look at a computer program. And yet it achieves something very fundamental. Similarly, well, I could go on about how you do reinforcement learning in the neocortex, but I'm not going to do that because I've already done that talk back in March, I believe, and it's online in video, so you can get that there. Okay, so we have systems. It's quite diverse. Feasibility. Why is it important to have these different systems? Well, we live in an environment where resources aren't always equally distributed, and some resources are much harder to come by than others. For example, food may be something that is difficult to come by. In other words, energy, something to supply all these watts that you would need if you were to run some very uniform type of system that needs to emulate a whole bunch of costs. Some improvements are cheaper than others. For example, when you're doing evolution, or let's say if you were trying to come up with a way to increase what a brain would do, it can be very easy to add more cells exactly like cells that are already there, or just to add another layer to brain. So some things are cheap, some things are easy, they're simple mutations. Other things are much harder, or involve a very smart algorithm, that's very difficult. And then there's the capabilities of competing species for development. That's an automatic consequence of competition, because many of your competitors who are not as good as you are eventually eliminated simply through their competition. So if they didn't keep up, gone. Just as an example, one of the principles that result in this is lazy computation and empirical evaluation. What you end up with is hardware that reacts quick enough, for example, the medium you're in. Like, let's say you're a fish and you're swimming in water. Quick enough to be able to move from your predator before you're eaten. And you're doing this in an environment by receiving continual feedback. So you're not really pre-computing everything that you need to do. It's you are making small changes, then looking at what the environment is giving back to you and making another change. It's constant feedback. So what you don't really end up with is decisions being made based on circuitry that calculate things precisely, beginning to end, predicting what's going on with current flow, resistance, energy reserve, ballistic herbs, etc. It's not how the organism is generally work, although in some cases perhaps that's exactly what does occur as a result of evolution. But I don't know exactly which one to point out there. But what I'm saying here is the environment is being used as part of your computation as the computer. And that's how you're being lazy. You're just using the environment for empirical evaluation. Okay, so let's get down to the nitty-gritty. There's about 4 pages of this. Why does our hardware match at 25 watts? One is this principle of lazy offloaded computation, where you're using the rest of the universe as hardware brain. The other is, okay, emergent pattern state. Unlike a computer, where you may lose a lot, if you whack on the head and you don't do damage, or if we lose our state for a moment, a sensible state returns, maybe not at exactly the same point, but most of the memory is still there, we still function the way we're not suddenly creating this. There's also the static or hardware memory. So unlike most of the memory now, where you either have to load on a hard disk into RAM disappears and turn off the power, most of our memory is static. It doesn't rely on constant refreshes of it. Then there's the event-triggered clockless, or most clockless activity of the brain. Basically, neurons just wait to see if something comes up. They don't have to constantly try. And in fact, you can measure when this isn't the case. So when we're not working in a clockless state, we have working when we're going on this short-term buffer that I was talking about, you can actually see the increased power consumption. And how I've measured this in patients who were undergoing surgery to find out where the source of the seizures was in their brain. So they did intracranial EEG studies, and they measured the power at different lengths of lists that they had to remember, and you could see that the power went up proportionally. Let's say 5, 6, 7, 8 items list. Tuning by relative phase, not by rate. So a lot of what goes on in our brain is by phase, not based on frequency or rate. Analog summation location rather than a precise digital calculation of something that's good enough analog. Nonlinear operation, which allows us to make decisions, because nonlinearity is good for finding thresholds. It also reflects very well on how units is put together. The universe is fairly nonlinear. So making use of what we see around us and being able to compute that also seems very rational. Nanoscale architecture, and I'm not just talking about the size of neurons or synapses, because they're actually rather large. But I'm also talking about, say, the distance between adjacent synapses on end. This is all part of dendritic computation. It matters where exactly the synapse is and how it influences electrical conductance from another synapse. And we use different mechanisms best suited to the scale. I was already talking about that earlier. And here, just as an example, take chemical diffusion for something that is supposed to diffuse, something that's supposed to be slow, broad, and it's supposed to last. Use electrical propagation, speed and precision, and use morphological changes for lasting things that are supposed to be distributed, or that you need to be able to connect one part of the brain with any other arbitrary part of the brain. Also, blur lines of function. Be opportunistic. Here, an example of recent finding is that, well, glia that we used to think were mostly just for life support and keeping them in good shape, cleaning up the environment around them, involved in some computation. They involved in part in feature extraction, sort of the reservoir function as they read that. Also, we use very small potential differences. It's millivolts an atom. And there's a slow, low switching speed. So what the individual neurons do is not very fast. That also keeps the power consumption down as well. It doesn't heat up the brain tissue. So we have very many cheap components though. So you go slow, it's robust, and we don't need to care too much exactly how well the network works, because they can all work well together. So there are minimal design specifications. We do local computation, and we have lots and lots of cache, lots of memory. There is so much memory, in fact, every neuron, every synapse has multiple types of memory residing right next to it. There's short-term potentiation, which is a type of memory that tells it how much it should still react to on new incoming signal. There's long-term potentiation, which I already spoke about, this chemical change that changes how strong the synapse is, and of course, morphological changes, just to name a few. And then, of course, there's the almost total, sometimes redundant, overparallelization. Generally, when we try to make a parallel system, we try to think of how many CPUs do we need to run a problem well. We've got 5 different threads, we want 5 different CPUs, something like that. But in the brain, we've got we've got an overcapacity in order to use 1,000 or 1 million neurons to participate in a certain action. Many of them are doing the same thing at the same time. So why does blue brain consume kilowatts? This is, of course, a nice example because blue brain tries to do something that a certain part of the brain, namely a small part of a rat's brain, is doing, and it's trying to do it very well, trying to do this simulation with physiological precision. Well, it's a uniform general-purpose hardware platform, first of all, and there are good reasons for that. It's emulating all of the specialized mechanisms that I just described before, and it's doing so in real time. There's little to no attempt to match hardware substrates, architecture, or mechanism to function. So it's clear why it's consuming a lot more. And I was just giving 2 examples. Say, for example, you simulate annealing. That's a case where you're specifically choosing to simulate something that otherwise the environment of the universe carries out lots of ways for free, basically. But you have to put a lot of effort to simulate it. Whereas, say, if you use radioactive decay as a way of making a random generator, then you're kind of matching your hardware to your problem. You're using something that is happening in the environment to your advantage. Okay, so this leads us to the questions then about what kind of processing you use. How well optimized and how universally adaptive is the brain actually, the kind of process that we are good at. Well, they're optimized to local purposes and constrained by the resources. We have limitations, of course, and just to list a few, here we go. It's very difficult to interpret, access, fix, or replace or modernize in brain. This is a problem that I'm really, really unhappy with. I want to do something about it. It's really hard to do anything to just get in there or even just store it somewhere else. It's very hard to get at it. It's critically dependent on life support, so you can't just take the brain out of this skull and put it on a table and it will still survive. You could also not take its entire body just down on Mars. It just won't work. So it's critically dependent on certain life support. It's unadapted to competition in different environments or other goals, which has been developed specifically by towards functioning in this environment, these kinds of competing challenges. And of course, basically, anything we're already using information tools for, like that I write down so I forget them, and just the fact that I'm in the computer right now. All of these other tools are evidence that there are things our brain is not really optimized for. Almost all experience is an emergent condition that we accept as valid rather than something supported by high-fidelity trail of evidence. What do I mean? Memory is terrible. I remember almost nothing from yesterday, and I wasn't thinking of it. It's just that, most of what I remember is a complete construct. It's just something that's plausible. A few bits and pieces I actually remember, and the rest I put together as it seems plausible, and I say, oh, that must have been the way that was. It's not real memory. And this bothers me more and more because I base my decisions and measure on this memory. So I don't really have a trail of evidence. I've got a trail of plausible things that I use for judgments. Also, I'm localized in space. Extraordinarily annoying that I can't be doing some of my processing here and some of my processing in Jacopo at the same time. So I would like to be able to be less localized in space. It's obviously a limitation. Localized in time. For some reason, our processes, they're all things that are happening right now. It's all whatever we're computing at the moment. I cannot, for example, use a comparison of my brain state 3 days ago and my brain state now to do something sensible with that. So I don't have processing over time in that sense. We have very short-term memory, we know that already, and our long-term memory is quite fallible and it's very slow at acquiring things. Our processing rate is slow. We don't multitask well, especially when we have to use this melody for multiple things, so say seek something. We have what's called bounded functionality, which is our tendency not to estimate things very well. We either are way too optimistic or too pessimistic in estimates. Although it seems that if you take a group of people, you can get a much better estimate. But I suppose that's a lot of pessimism and a lot of optimism when you get. There are limits to or what we can attend to at one time. Limits of comprehension and sensory experience. Obviously, I have no idea what things look like in the X-ray spectrum. Okay, so, well, how will optimize continuous adaptable? These are all domain-specific specializations that we have. This is what's caused our brain to be the way it is. And why is that a useful way of optimizing? Events can occur. The brain does that very well, much better than AI. But many AI also still struggle with they try to present everything changing without the same pace. Meaning is derived from coincidence. Whatever fires together wires gets the head together. So coincidence is important. It can tell you something about reality. Reaction speed is practical needed nature. Mostly that's true. It's getting a little more difficult now. Driving a fast car, reaction speed may not be enough. Perception matches the limits of what needs to be resolved. How much of the field wants, also mostly true. And the majority of situations that we're in require only one localization attention time or one focus on locality. Although sometimes that might be that you have multiple directions coming at you from different directions or things like that. Okay, many possible solutions can be propagated. Winner take all action model. This is very useful because we don't have to pay attention to many things at the same time. We can use our resources to compute a lot of different solutions at the same time and then just pick a winner. we really usually only have to take care of body and rotation time. So the fact that we're localized space is a problem. The fact that we have rotation can be also not a problem. But I've put down air traffic controllers as a counter example because we know that they have very high burnout. And maybe that has something to do with that. Because they take care of a lot of location at the same time. Okay, the type of I/O that we're able to deal with are caused by events that A, need to be able to deal with and do something about, and B, that can do something about. What I mean is, okay, yes, we can deal with disturbances in our visual field or vibrations, we can react to that and do something about it, but we have really no reason to be able to deal with gamma ray bursts, for example. I think we can protect ourselves against that, or at least there wasn't at times that people were involved. Entirely probabilistic, as in those events which are frequent and describe the kind of I/O that we've been receiving, are responsible for the kinds of mechanisms that are involved. So basically, you use all those cheap ways of adapt yourself to evolve yourself with hardware. Generations really cost nothing since there's no deadline. So evolution just keep on making new generations of things. So I'm almost there now. What do we learn from all this? And is the brain's approach the way to go? I would say yes and no. It really depends on the goal. If you're trying to optimize towards a domain, then yes, I would say co-processing hardware is the way to go. Do try to adapt your hardware to what you're trying to do. If you're trying to explore a domain, no. If you're prototyping, it can often be much better to have less universal implementation. And I'll just jump right to the bottom for a second there, because I do this all the time. I'll use MATLAB, for example, because it's very easy to write something complicated on one command line and have it do something really complex quickly, easily, even though it's extraordinarily slow, because MATLAB is a very uniform platform, very non-optimized towards getting certain things done quickly. But it's good for prototyping versus writing something in C or assembly language or putting it in FPGA. But in the brain is same kind of choices being made. There are parts of our brains that are more uniform, and they're used for processes where you can use a systematic part to an algorithm and keep things there temporarily. For example, the hippocampus and neocortex are both such areas. They have in which the cells are arranged in a very typical fashion. They do a stereotypical type of function, and they don't always do this for the same things. They will be reused for new memories, new computations. Versus specialization in the other areas, in our sensory regions, then we have very specialized parts which are always used for the same purpose and very specific. Okay, so the last step, hacking minds. And I'm basically just going to read this page. This is not just about equaling raw computational power of brain, it's also about hacks and about taking smart shortcuts. In many cases, utilizing computation not even carried out in the brain, but rather carried out outside for free. It's also about picking your implementations. Consider hardware choices, like that CNS to neuromorphic computing GPUs, as well as, of course, our general typical silicon hardware. Of course, if you go deep enough into the hardware of the brain, eventually it all does become uniform. I mean, how could it not be the case, right? Keep on digging deeper, eventually end up at things like that. I'm not saying you have to go that far, but certainly wherever it is uniform is a lot lower than neural networks, so it's not your artificial neural networks that's the typical uniform level. And then I just wanted to say that I'm really astonished and stunned by the sort of things that Anders talks about, and also that Hunter talks about with his IT AGI, which are really about the extremes of what we can possibly achieve in terms of computation in the universe. And it's fantastic to think about. But what I wanted to address here, first of all, was just what we need to do or understand in this universe as we have it right now, which at least equal and exceed the kind of intelligent computation that already exists. If we want to upload ourselves to substrate-independent minds, there is the hard but universal exploratory route you can take, say, for example, through emulated brain slices, and there is an apt and easy but progressive route of gradual augmentation and uploading through that method. This sort of, again, looks at different kinds of it for different choices. So I would say There are things we can still learn from the way the brain works, and pick your choices, make your choice, pick your mind carefully. That's it.
Since Randal is actually here with us, I think we have time for a couple of questions at least before the last presentation by a speaker who is not. So, who has the first question?
This answers the question better from having in terms of real impressive augmentations of the brain, what would be the most promising near-term part we see in 10 to 20 years? You see things like boosting new proliferating automatically, or building new pathways using nanobots, or neutralizing external devices that you have, finding what these connections are.
Well, I think some are, of course, low-hanging fruit in terms of technology, just because we already have some of it. So basically, you just take what we've already got in your iPhone and just try to make it more and more easy to use. I mean, when we talk about augmentation, you have to go there first. Not necessarily about plugging things into brain. It's not necessarily about making any hard changes. That's where you want to go. But realize that all this is augmentation as well. We keep getting more easy to use and more all-around attachments, etc. But what I think also matters is whatever we really are interested in. So, for example, when we say what's going to happen in 20 years, part of it depends on what I choose, for example, to work on, or what you choose to work on, what everybody chooses to work on. And I think, for example, one of the really interesting things are the kinds of technologies coming out of optogenetics right now. The fact that you can stimulate neurons without having to undergo surgery, without having to put in an electrode in just one specific spot or interpret something from a scan. I think the fact that you can affect a whole lot of neurons in a specific area, but only in a specific time, is really useful. So that's an example of a technology that I think that will become very useful for augmentation purposes. And then the reverse, you need something to be able to read out. And right now that's a little harder, but I think there's something coming along in those same areas. So more in the area of, say, amplification through vectors that you send into the axons and fluids, implementing new channels, things like that. I think that's really interesting. Whereas right now we've really explored mostly how can we do internal scans without something inside the body, like MRI, or we've explored how to use electrodes that we will stick into the brains. So anyway, that's one of the things I hope.
The next question is Dave. I'd like to ask you, Randal, the question for us.
Oh, okay, sure.
Dave.
Interesting talk. To identify substrate-independent lines with cranial-dependent lines, cranial textures of consciousness, because by analogy, if you want to emulate a game of the particular kind of textures of the pieces relevant accounts is the pattern, even assuming, which I'm skeptical, that you model the mind brain as a classical digital computer. Is there any particular reason to expect that the failure would be the same? I think this is important because if they were absolute failure without it, it's the pleasure of pain axis not defined nomologically, but in terms of the hedonic tone. In one sense, nothing would matter. Sorry.
You're just yes, aren't you, about what actually matters? Because you can debate that, of course. You could say, well, even if you make something else, but you still have a wonderful AI and it would be a beautiful thing to use. So some people might be happy with that. I wouldn't necessarily, so I'm with you on thinking this is important. I'll just repeat the question. You were asking, do I think that substrate-independent lines is also quality-independent lines? I'm not exactly sure that I know it. First of all, I'm not entirely sure that this notion of polyop is very well substantiated. We can debate that later. But let's assume for a moment it is. Then I still wonder, let's say, for example, that we don't get rid of sensors. We don't get rid of bodies. Let's say we still have an embodied functions and provide a body of some sort, or an environment that will give you input. Then what sort of quality about individual neurons would matter? Let's say we were to replace just the neurons inside the brain, just the neocortex or something like that, with a different hardware platform. which product are you using doing that? It's not clear to me that you're using it. So as long as you are aware of the things that you are re-implementing when you're emulating something, and those things are leaving out, you're doing it for a reason, either because it's kind of feasible or because you choose to do that. And I think you have a pretty good handle on the kinds of experiences and sensations that you still have, whether or not that corresponds to this much bigger problem.
Max?
Yeah, since those were on singularities that comes up a lot, and if your view on these levels of understanding show very well, very effectively, originally to understand. On Ray's view, it seems to have been 30 years ago, figured out what's happening because of exponential improvements in scanning and so on. What is your view about these system there?
So Max is asking me what's my view on the timeline Ray Kurzweil says for all this understanding that needs to be done. And Ray Kurzweil says within 30 years, is that what you mean?
Something like that. Yeah.
Well, if he says 30, I'll say 20. No, I'm not kidding. It's just everybody has to do this. You know, Henry Marta said he would build a brain in 10 years. Everybody's going down the curve. And I know how this works. We work for House and we're going to do whole genome scans for $10 in under 10 minutes. So I'm not going there really because I think that the time.
Asking for your time, what your comment on his methodology.
Oh, his methodology. How do you? As long as he's not cherry picking the data he's got, and that's something I don't know because I just haven't examined it. As long as he's not cherry picking his data, then it's just a statistical result, right? I mean, he's putting this on a graph, he's showing you what's happening and how fast it's been happening, and then he's extrapolating that and saying something about what he thinks will happen in the future. There are two things, of course. There's the possible cherry picking, which is a very typical normal statistics. And then there's also the question of whether he can predict what sort of developments are actually necessary to get to an understanding that we need, whether or not they even lie in the functions that he's looking at. Also not entirely clear, but just because I'm not sure what he uses to make all this, to come up with all of these graphs, and what exactly are his reasons for that, I don't feel we should debate this. I don't really know if it's how good he's going to be at predicting that. Yes.
A little bit going back to the beginning when you said, okay, I build a fantastic AI better than myself in many ways, but I'm not so interested in perpetuating that AI necessarily. But that you have built an AGI that you really respect, it has a lot of the qualities that you take a massive analytic, so you have no fear of death, and you just basically look at it, it's got a merit-based system. This should be perpetuated a lot with myself, and it's almost like frontal lobe, and you do not have the anxiety of what's going to happen to me personally. You would just mathematically kind of say, that deserves to go on, and pull those past my ideas going forward. Forget about scanning and accuracy, what parts me and what memories it's. These are just my ideas. That's good enough for me. You ever see yourself getting to that?
Okay, so Tudor's basically asking if we were to create an artificial intelligence or artificial general intelligence that is in some ways or appears to be in some ways superior to us, and we would find that ideally good enough that it should just continue to somehow avoid our own fear of death, and just say no, it should just go on instead of us. Is that just fine? Or what is my reason for thinking otherwise? Anyway, I'll just go into that now. First of all, I'm not sure what sort of goals an AGI should strive for. Like a fantastic AGI, the best you can possibly think about, what is its purpose? What are its goals? Like how does it even determine those? Most of our goals are set up through drives that are just the result of evolutionary pressure. And I don't know what is perfection. Is just, the ideal for an AGI. And we could have it follow the same kinds of drives that humans are following, but I don't think that that's what we were looking for. So I'm not quite sure what it is, first of all. So I don't know how we identify such.
You determine those goals sufficiently identified by you.
Okay, so there are basically human goals. You're saying we
that's what you choose.
So there are human goals. So it's whatever we think is good at, and we determine it is really good at that, and it's fantastic better. Then I can assume that there are some people who indeed think that that is the way to go. I don't think that everyone has the same opinion, and I don't think that shares my views about, basically being part of a machine that goes forward rather than making machines and letting them go forward. In fact, I'm not even sure there's going to be a big difference 1,000 years from now between an AGI that's developed 1,000 years or an upload that has, basically merged with our machine capabilities and developed for 1,000 years. I think that what it comes down to is this question of what is our purpose, why do we do things? And since the purpose isn't a universal given, and I don't really know why I should create an ideal AGI and let it go on without me, that's just not so. I don't choose that. But I'm not saying that it's there for a specific reason. It's not really rational, it's just based on choice.
Last. This is right now most academic research for curiosity purposes. It's not fully marketable. Maybe there's some spin-off medical applications. But do you foresee in the next 20 years a moment when there is some kind of marketable model in this field, and that a lot of more money might flow into this field?
And you were asking whether or not at some point in the relatively near future be something marketable, some kind of spin-off that's related to this whole idea of substrate-independent minds, organization, uploading this whole area. That's a really big question because there's so many things that fit into that area. It's hugely multidisciplinary. A lot of things are happening all over right now that are actually that. And I could say that there are all spin-offs that are being used right now based on this kind of work. I'm not even sure if I'm allowed to talk about this because I think I signed an NDA. But anyway, there is a certain someone who is very well known in the neuroscience community who has developed models of a certain part of the brain and is now implementing them for a certain very large manufacturer of chips to use something of what the brain can do very well. So, without giving away any details, there are already ideas for spin-offs from some of this kind of work.
And we have now the very last question by Natasha with Amor. I will ask him to read that.
Okay, Natasha asks, can you give us your understanding of what personhood is and how it relates to SIM? If this question was oh no, that's in parentheses.
Okay, so she's asking what is mind of personhood and how does it relate to SIM?
SIM.
SIM.
Oh, okay. It's completely different from what I thought. Okay. How does personhood relate to substrate-dependent minds? Okay. My view is that, okay. What is personhood again? Are we talking about personal identity or self-awareness or consciousness? I guess that would be the first question back.
Well, she's typing right now, and she's hearing you. So let's see.
I discussed it with Natasha by mail. She just doesn't want to give up, and she just doesn't want to acknowledge that there is no such thing as well-defined personhood. Anyway, I discussed that with Natasha. Go to hear Randal's answer now.
I was hoping that she was talking about sin because I wanted to. I wanted to get back to the previous talk, the one about getting rid of lying in the future, but maybe I can talk about that later. So that's a different view. So what was Natasha saying about
okay, she rephrased it as, do you think personhood is consciousness and or mind?
Okay. What is personhood in terms of consciousness or mind? I think that personhood is whatever I define that I am right now. So basically, I'm functioning. There's something that's going on here, giving me perceptions, and I use that to act on, and it feels like it. So it must be everything, first of all, that's being processed in my mind. So all the brain, all the brain's processes, first of all, are involved in this. And yes, I'm conscious. If I want to define any consciousness, it's certainly what perceiving right now. I mean, there's David Chalmers on that one. So I think that's also relevant and important. That's personally. And okay, so how does it relate to substrate-independent minds? I think it relates totally because I wouldn't be satisfied with the goal. Let's say I would not say that substrate-independent minds have achieved unless you can keep all of that in there as well.
quick follow-up to that. What percentage of that person that you just defined, you say is unique to you and not shared by probably all the different?
Okay, so Twitter is asking what percentage of person that I just defined is unique to myself rather than to everyone else in the room. I'm going to have to throw out a guess because I haven't calculated the actual percentages. But I believe that, okay, here's the problem. Yes, I believe that a lot of the, let's say, you remember the list of research areas I gave you, the high level and low level, all that stuff? On a high level, from that perspective, like psychology, and you look at like why are the reasons why I'm doing a certain thing, how I react to stuff, how I think, how I recognize objects, all of that. At that level, I would say the vast majority of myself is very similar to everyone else. But that's at the high level. If you wanted to make a copy of me at that high level, you couldn't do it because the copy, myself is implemented at a lower level. And if you wanted to take there and have all the memory, have all the reasons why I would react in a certain way to something that is happening, like the sensory experiences, you would somehow need to tease that out of much lower level stuff. And that is not identical to everyone because the same kinds of functions can be implemented in so many different ways using such an over-parameterized system as the brain. So that does not, knowing that there's a lot that's similar between us, does not make it necessarily easier to copy a certain individual's self into some other hardware potential. This is, there's lots of room for more talk about that. There's that issue between high and low level.
Thank you very much, Randal. Let's now move to the end. See that there are not too many of you left. Well, some more now, but for those who are still with us, we want to finish by offering you something like a music performance. And I believe many people will be familiar with the work of the Italian astrophysicist Fiorella Terenzi. She's not only an astrophysicist, she's also a writer, also a musician, who somehow managed to synthesize signals from the stars into music from the stars. What I'm going to do now, Fiorella is not with us today, but we do have a PowerPoint presentation with a music clip. Nobody is going to read the presentation. As a matter of fact, several of us offered Fiorella to read the presentation aloud, but she wanted Natasha to read it. At the time when Natasha was able to be physically here. Unfortunately, Natasha could not come, and also our internet connection died yesterday, in the very middle of Natasha's talk. Fortunately, there is a recording. Natasha didn't manage to be here in the class. She didn't manage to be virtual. We are very sorry for that. I want to see Natasha again. I think I invite everyone to give the last applause to Natasha with amore. Natasha is listening to me right now. Very sorry not to have seen you now. I hope to see you next time. I'm going to put on the music clip of Fiorella Terenzi, and then I'm going to go slowly to the slides of her presentation, which are really meant to be read with music as background. Good.
I just say what word.
Okay.
fast.
Yeah, but the music is stopped. I think I'll put the music there. Right. Sandberg? Let's start with this. Thank Fiorella for this great presentation. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of this year's TransVision. Thank you very much again for coming.
We should thank first of all Julie. It's a really big effort, not just in these 3 days, but in the out of the music is music for the stars. Alright, and I think we should thank first of all the stars.